Okay, good morning, everyone. Nice to see you here. I hope you're doing okay. I hope you're ready for the weekend because, of course, it's Friday. To those of you who have sent me your micropapers already, thank you very much. For those of you who still have to, make sure you email them to me today sometime so I can start marking them tomorrow. But yeah, Cindy's here. Good morning, Cindy. Good morning, Tika again. Good morning, Jimmy. Hi, Ella. Good evening, Ella. Karen, good morning, Karen. Good morning, Mashid. Good morning, Jenna. Aliana, good morning. KC is here. Good morning, KC. Good morning, Ying. Um, you'll notice I'm a little sniffy today. There's something pollinating outside that I'm allergic to. Apparently, I don't know what it is. Um, but every June I have little allergies for about a week, so I don't know what it is, but I'm going to be a little sniffy today, so I'm sorry about that. Adalbert, good morning, Adalbert. Good morning, Min. Yeah, so as people kind of continue to trickle in here, what we'll do today is we'll talk a little bit about what we just read. So we'll talk about the Indo-Europeans and sort of how these Vedic or Aryan people continue to push their way into northern India and start to mix with the people who are already living there. I have a little more video to show you, and that will take care of today. So it's going to be a pretty easy day, but we still have to get through some questions here. Good morning, Michael. So without further ado, let's do that, right? So as you'll recall, of course, we're talking about India, and we are in the Vedic age. And so these Indo-European people, or Indo-Aryan people, I'm sorry, seem to have migrated into India from the northwest, so from Pakistan, from Afghanistan, maybe as far away as Turkmenistan, and they sort of entered into this northern part of India, and their interactions with the people who are already living there serves as the basis for the creation of later Indian civilization and Hinduism and the Varna social system, but we'll talk about that in just a little bit. Good morning, Pearly. We said that one of our major sources of knowledge about these people were the Rig Veda and other Vedic hymns, right? Because these people were moving around a lot, and so they don't leave a lot of archaeological evidence behind, but we can tell things based on their ritual chants and their ritual prayers. And so, again, we said that in those prayers, we can see them praying to the gods to bless them with cattle and with good harvests, and with rain and friends and wealth and sons. And so that tells us a little bit about the things that are important to them, right? The cattle, good harvest, good rain, and sons are very important in this culture as well, right? We know that their principal occupation, so the way that they kind of lived their lives and got their food, was through herding cows, although they did grow some food as well. Yeah, so we learn that from the Vedas, from their sort of ritual prayers. We talked yesterday about the fact that they seem to have lived in sort of multi-generational families, 3-generational families, where fathers were kind of the head of the household, sons were responsible for herding cattle and for sort of winning honor for the family, and men were the ones that held power in this culture, in this society. Although the textbook points out that women had a little more power than they would later have. So things are a little more equal for women in this period. Regarding religion, we learned that the Aryans are polytheistic, right? So they have multiple gods. They imagine that the universe is composed of the earth and the sky and the nether world or the underworld, which is actually pretty common in world religions, or in many world religions. And again, people interact with the gods, and if you praise the gods and sacrifice to the gods, then they'll help you and they'll treat you well. right? And it seems that one god in particular, Indra, was kind of the most favored god, the god of rain or of storms. Yesterday we watched a little bit of this video, the story of India, and I asked you a bunch of questions, and we learned a few things, right? We talked about William Jones, a British philologer, a British historian, who learned Sanskrit from a Brahmin priest, started comparing that language to other languages, and kind of shockingly to him, discovered that there are pretty significant similarities between these languages. And again, you wouldn't think so. Sanskrit looks and sounds totally different from other classical languages that people understood in Europe. But as you can see in just this little list of words, you can see a lot of, good morning, Carmen. You can see a lot of similarities in these basic terms, right? And father, one, fire, field, sun, king. Many of these words are strikingly similar in different languages. And so what William Jones was describing was the fact that, sorry, I'm just going to jump ahead a little bit, was that all of these languages seem to have been related. And so they are children languages of a older parent language. And so the idea here is that we had a very early Proto-European language that arose in this part of the world, and then as people migrated away from this area and spread into other areas, their original language began to evolve and change. And they evolved and changed into all of these languages here, which is quite amazing, actually, right? That one sort of grandparent language has all of these descendants, and all of these languages are related to each other in important ways, but also completely different from each other in many other ways. And you certainly can't, if you speak Russian, you certainly can't understand any of Bengali, right? So they are very different, but they do have similarities that show they are related to each other in the very distant past. We also learned from those Vedas in the video that Aryan means civilized people, and so these people saw themselves as civilized or cultured. And we also saw in those prayers that they were recording evidence of their movements, and so they mentioned rivers that they've crossed, or valleys that they settled in, or battles that they had, and that helps us kind of piece together the history of a people that don't have a lot of archaeological evidence left behind, but the Vedas are an important source of these people's history, for us anyway. We saw the host of that video go in search of this drink that is mentioned in the Vedas, right? He went in search of soma, which is made from a plant that grows in Afghanistan, and it contains ephedrine, right? So it's a stimulant. It's sort of like caffeine. It makes you kind of tingly and energetic, and apparently it helps you compose Vedic hymns. So if that's something that's important to you, you might want to seek out some soma. I'm sorry about the dogs in the background here. And then finally, yesterday we went to the ruins of an ancient city in Turkmenistan called Goner. Oh, good grief. Called Goner. And so we saw it was a very elaborate city with lots of streets and temples. And I know it didn't look like much in the video, but I found this picture of it. And so you can see it's a big city, right? It's a very significant city. Lots of construction here that's gone into it, and it seems to have been an important city around 4,000 years ago, kind of in Central Asia, where people were farming, people were trading with people in the Indus Valley, and also trading with people in Mesopotamia and with Egypt. And so this area seems to have been a bit of a crossroads for people in Central Asia. And so For our purposes, it was significant because the video was suggesting that perhaps the Aryans who found their way into India may have passed through or come from this area of the world. And so it was kind of interesting to think about that. Okay, so I asked you to read this section of the textbook. I asked you to answer a few questions here. And so I'll ask you. Oops. So I think I already asked this, but I'm going to let you answer it for me anyway. What is this Indo-European language family? What's this Indo-European language family? Okay, so KC says, she says, consists of different languages that are closely related to each other. Yes, that's part of it, right? So we have a collection of languages that are related. Yeah, that's good. Come on, people. There's 16 of you in here. I should be getting buried in live chat messages. Come on. Let's see. Okay, so Karen says languages that have similar sounds and that they originate from one language. Yeah, so we have a collection of different languages. They are related to each other, and they seem to originate from one very old language, right? So again, think of it as parents and grandparents. We have one sort of grandparent language in the past, and it's a very ancient one. Let's see. Anything else? Anything else that we should add to that? Anything else we should add? Alice says, general name for some yeah, so it's definitely the name for that family of languages. That group of languages are broadly described as Indo-European languages because again they have that one grandparent, that one ancestor language. Okay, next question I asked you was, oops, oh hey Caleb. The next question I asked you was this: what kind of changes occur over 4 centuries that the Aryans are spreading across northern India? Okay, so Cindy says they're driving their horses herds east, migrating along and colonizing the plains surrounding the Ganges. Yeah, so these people are moving into northern India. They are encountering the sort of indigenous Indians, the people who were living in India before, and they are kind of spreading their culture, spreading their lifestyle, but also interacting with these people as well. So that's good. Eliana says lands were cleared and village communities formed. Yeah, so people, some of these Aryans are kind of moving their herds of cows and horses across the land. Some of them are settling in place and starting to grow their own crops, right? And we have technological development as well, right? People start making iron, which is not that easy to do. So we're kind of entering the Iron Age in India, but also people are starting to grow rice, right? So that's an important development in cultural and technological development as well. Mashid says agriculture developed more. Good. Jobs became more diverse. Yeah, and we talked about that a little earlier when we talked about the development of civilizations, right? People start to, when farming gets more productive, not everyone has to be a farmer, right? And so people can do other things. They can practice other crafts. They can make other things. And so that starts to happen in this part of the world too. So we have craft specialization, right, Nasheed? Jobs became more diverse. Village communities were formed, good, and yeah, and population begins to increase, good. Jenna says family includes. Oh, okay, that's from before, but that's very right as well, Jenna. The Indo-European language group does contain many languages from South Asia, from Central Asia, and from kind of the Eastern Mediterranean world as well. Yeah, you're very right about that. Casey says population began to grow and people could easily engage in other professions. Yeah, so we have craft specialization. That's good. And then a social order slowly takes shape, and we'll get to that. That's good, Ella. That social order is kind of the answer to question number 4, so maybe we'll save that. But you're very right. That happens too. So, what kind of political structures begin to develop here? So not social ones, but political ones. So how are people controlled or in charge of things, I guess? So Cindy says there are different types of central authority. So these Aryans are spreading across northern India, and different kinds of political structures are appearing in different places. So it's not totally centralized. There's lots of different things happening. So Cindy says, but the landscape was dominated by kingdoms and by oligarchies. And so kingdoms usually have a king. So those are monarchies, right? Mono is archon mono is one and archon is ruler. So when you have a king, you have a monarchy, you have one ruler. Oligarchies are where you have a group of people in charge, okay? And so depending on the society or culture that you're in, sometimes that has to do with maybe you have the smartest people, running your society. Maybe you have the most powerful people running your society. Maybe you have the richest people running your society. An oligarchy is where a small collection of people are in charge. And so here in northern India in this period, we have some kings appearing, but we also have some situations where there's a small group of people in power. So we have kingdoms and we have oligarchies. Yes. What else should be said about those political structures? I know it got a little bit complicated, but can we kind of summarize it in some way? The way that those political developments were working. No, we can't. Okay. I think what they were talking about in the textbook is that there was a very sort of complicated structure, right, of tribes and chiefs. Some of those chiefs met in a council, and so you have these kind of different systems where sometimes you have a single person in power, sometimes you have a small group in power, sometimes that small group of people represents larger family and clan groups below, and so they all kind of vote, and then their representatives meet together. So you almost have kind of almost like a democracy republic thing happening. And so there's lots of different forms of political organization happening here. Basically because there's no one ruler. There's nobody who controls all of these people. It's depending on where you are, there are different ways of governing. Okay. All right. And last one I asked you was this one. I said, how do social hierarchies evolve during this period? So this is that, this has to do with that Varna system, right? Um, so Cindy says it's a system for classifying people based on their occupational categories. Yeah. So as as these Aryans move into northern India, they start to settle down, they start to farm, they start to sort of interact and sort of mix in with the Indians who already live there. Um, they start to grow more rice, they start to grow more food. That allows for craft specialization. People start to do other things other than farming and herding, and that leads to the creation of these social categories, right? Based on occupation, because people do different things, right? So here we have this creation of these different social categories um, that are organized by the political and religious leaders of the society, right? Um, and there's a few different groups, right? So at the bottom level, you have the Shudras, right? So Shudras, according to this way of thinking, they are kind of ritually polluted, and um, this is kind of an anthropological term that has to do with kind of religious purity, and so they are kind of the least pure religiously, if that makes sense. And so Shudras here are kind of at the bottom level of society. Um, they are they do the kind of jobs that honestly they do the kind of jobs that people usually don't want, and so they mention in the textbook that menial labor, so just kind of very basic labor. Sometimes, sorry, Eliana, what else did you say? Um, yeah, they can't really participate in sacrifices. Often Shudras do things like bury the dead, because sometimes in societies when you're dealing with dead bodies, there's kind of ritual pollution that happens there, and so Shudras are responsible for taking care of the dead. Sometimes they're responsible for creating leather for tanning animal skins, because that's a really messy, gross process. And so people at the bottom level of society will often do that. Yeah, so we have Shudras. That's no problem, Lily. Hello. Who else do we have? We have three other classes, three other social classes. Who do we have? Who do we have? We have three other social classes. Who else do we have there, good people? Three more. We have Shudras. And we have Shudras. Yep, there we go, Mashid. Oh, sorry. Aliana's got one too. So nope, not Varnas. Something else. We have Brahmins, we have Kshatriyas, and we have Vaishyas, right? So yeah, so Brahmins are kind of at the top of society, or almost at the top, right? And these are priests, right? These are kind of people who are, this is a class of people who are responsible for maintaining, oh, that's weird. Um, nope, that's not right either. Hang on. Hang on. I didn't think that would come through. Okay. Where were we? Right. Brahmins. So Brahmins are kind of the top level of society. They're responsible for memorizing the Vedas. They're responsible for doing rituals, praying to the gods, looking after ritual functions. That's what the Brahmins are there for. Okay. Kshatriyas are kind of a warrior group, and so people who are chiefs, leaders, warriors, those are all Kshatriya people. And then the Vaishya people are kind of just the regular farmers, the regular people, maybe some merchants and things, and then the Shudras at the bottom. So you have this kind of social hierarchy with the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas at the top, and then you have the Vaishyas and the Shudras at the bottom. So the Varna, I think, Aliana describes the whole system. I think so. Um, yeah. So the story here is that as these people move in to northern India, they sort of start to mix with the existing culture that's there. So there's an interesting cultural interaction as these two groups kind of grow together, right? And they sort of adapt to each other. People start to grow more food. People start to specialize in certain crafts, and that eventually leads to the stratification of society. Varna is something like a classification of things. Okay, so then that's exactly what we have, right? We have a classification of people within society. Yes, I think that's my understanding. That's my understanding too, Sarvesh. Yeah, so we have these creation of a social hierarchy, and what's kind of interesting about this particular hierarchy is that your status in society is basically ascribed. And so if you are born if you're born a Kshatriya, then you have that status throughout your life, right? And so the status is given to you based on your birth. The other thing that's interesting about this, and we'll talk more about this on Monday, is the idea that there's not any social mobility within a society like this, right? So in theory, in a society like Canada or the US, you could be born sort of in a very poor family, but you could sort of work your way up and go to university, and you could, in theory, you could become prime minister or a rock star or a famous scientist or whatever. So there is social mobility within Canadian society, but in a society like this, there isn't, right? Because if you were born into the Shudra group, if you're born into that group, that's just who you are. That's where you stay. You can't work really hard and become a Kshatriya or a Vaishya. You can't, it doesn't work that way. You belong to that group for your entire life. You marry someone else from that group, so you can't marry out of your group. That's just a part of who you are, and that's just a part of how society works. There are, let me see. That's a good question, Sarvesh. I think, this Varna system, and sort of the caste system that follows it. I think India is kind of the most sort of popular example of this type of social organization, one that has no social mobility and where people's identity is kind of ascribed to them. It's the most popular example. I don't know if it's the only one, and so that's something I'd have to do a little bit of research on. I'm not sure if this type of system is unique to India, or if it's just that India is the most common example of it. That I'd have to look into, but that's a good question. Yeah, okay, so we have this kind of very regimented social structure appearing out of this Vedic period, right? Yeah, okay, so here's what we'll do, good people. There's just a little more video that I would like you to watch, but I'd also like to just do a shorter class today because we've all been working really hard this week. I sense that people are maybe starting to feel a little tired or a little worn out, and so what I'm going to ask you to do is watch just a little more video. I posted the links in Microsoft Teams. It's one of them is just the end of the video that we already watched, and the other one is kind of a setup to what we'll be doing next week. So next week we'll look a little more at the Varna system, the caste system, and then we'll talk about Buddhism, because Buddhism is a very important thing that comes out of India, and of course has spread far beyond the borders of India and is still a major world religion or spiritual practice. And maybe it has some interesting things to teach us as well, but we'll deal with that next week. So what I'll ask you to do is, if you haven't sent me your micropaper, lots of people have, but if you haven't sent it to me, send it to me by the end of the day today, please. Watch the 2 sections of the video in Microsoft Teams. So there's just an end of the video. I've got the little times for you. The end of the last video that we watched and a little bit of the beginning of the next one. And then next week we will pick up this sort of Varna caste system and talk about it a little more. And then we'll talk about Buddhism and maybe a little bit about political organization too, but I'm not sure about that. Yeah, so maybe I'll leave it there. I'll let you watch those videos and then you are free. I hope everyone has a good weekend. Thank you for being here and for interacting in the live chat. That was good. Yeah, have a good weekend, and I will see you. I'll see you on Monday. Okay, so bye.